The sack of Rome in 410 was undertaken by the Visigoths led by their king, Alaric. At that time, Rome was no longer the capital of the Western Roman Empire, having been replaced by Mediolanum, now Milan, in 286, and then by Ravenna in 402. Nevertheless, the city of Rome retained a paramount position as the eternal city and a spiritual center of the empire. This was the first time in almost 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy, and the sack was a major shock to contemporaries. The sacking of 410 is seen as a major landmark in the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Saint Jerome, living in Bethlehem, wrote, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." The Germanic tribes had undergone massive technological, social, and economic changes after 4 centuries of contact with the Roman Empire. From the 1st to 4th centuries, their populations, economic production, and tribal confederations grew, and their ability to conduct warfare increased to the point of challenging Rome. The Goths, one of the Germanic tribes, had invaded the Roman Empire on and off since 238. But in the late 4th century, the Huns began to invade the lands of the Germanic tribes and pushed many of them into the Roman Empire. In 376, the Huns forced many Visigoths led by Fritigern and Alaric to seek refuge in the Eastern Roman Empire. Soon after, starvation, high taxes, hatred from the Roman population, and governmental corruption turned the Goths against the empire. The Goths rebelled and began looting and pillaging throughout the Eastern Balkans. A Roman army, led by the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens, marched to put them down. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378, Fritigern decisively defeated Emperor Valens, who was killed in battle. Peace was eventually established in 382 when the new Eastern Emperor, Theodosius I, signed a treaty with the Dervings, who would become known as the Visigoths. The treaty made the Visigoth subjects of the empire as foederati. They were allotted the northern part of the dioceses of Dacia and Thrace, and while the land remained under Roman sovereignty and the Visigoths were expected to provide military service, they were considered autonomous. The sack was a culmination of many terminal problems facing the Western Roman Empire. Domestic rebellions and usurpations weakened the empire in the face of external invasions. These factors would permanently harm the stability of the Roman Empire in the West. The Roman army meanwhile became increasingly barbarian and disloyal to the empire. A more severe sack of Rome by the Vandals followed in 455. The Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 when the Germanic Odovacer removed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, and declared himself king of Italy. On the 24th of August 410, the Visigoths entered Rome through its Salarian Gate, according to some opened by treachery, according to others by want of food, and pillaged the city for 3 days. Many of the city's great buildings were ransacked, including the mausoleums of Augustus and Hadrian, in which many emperors of the past were buried. The ashes of the urns in both tombs were scattered. Any and all movable goods were stolen all over the city. Some of the few places the Goths spared were the 2 major basilicas connected to Peter and Paul, though from the Lateran palace they stole a massive, 2,025-pound silver ciborium that had been a gift from Constantine. Structural damage to buildings was largely limited to the areas near the old Senate House and the Salarian Gate, where the gardens of Sallust were burned and never rebuilt. The people of Rome were devastated. Many Romans were taken captive, including the emperor's sister, Galla Placidia. Some citizens would be ransomed, others would be sold into slavery, and still others would be raped and killed. Pelagius, a Roman monk from Britain, survived the siege and wrote an account of the experience in a letter to a young woman named Demetra. This dismal calamity is but just over, and you yourself are a witness to how Rome that commanded the world was astonished at the alarm of the Gothic trumpet, when that barbarous and victorious nation stormed her walls and made her way through the breach. Where were then the privileges of birth and the distinctions of quality? Were not all ranks and degrees leveled at that time and promiscuously huddled together? Every house was then a scene of misery and equally filled with grief and confusion. The slave and the man of quality were in the same circumstances, and everywhere the terror of death and slaughter was the same, unless we may say the fright made the greatest impression on those who had the greatest interest in living. The sack was nonetheless restrained by the standards of the age. There was no general slaughter or wholesale enslavement of the city's inhabitants, and the two main basilicas of Peter and Paul were nominated places of sanctuary. Most of the buildings and monuments in the city survived intact, though stripped of their valuables. Refugees from Rome flooded the province of Africa, as well as Egypt and the East. Most refugees were robbed as they sought asylum, and St. Jerome wrote that Heraclian, the Count of Africa, sold some of the young refugees into eastern brothels. After 3 days of looting and pillage, Alaric quickly left Rome and headed for southern Italy. He took with him the wealth of the city and a valuable hostage, Galla Placidia, the sister of Emperor Honorius. Alaric died of illness at Consentia in late 410, mere months after the sack. According to legend, he was buried with his treasure by slaves in the bed of the Busento River. The Visigoths established the Visigothic kingdom in southwestern Gaul in 418, and they would go on to help the Western Roman Empire fight Attila the Hun at the Battle of the Catalaunian Fields in 451. Using the number of people on the food dole as a guide, Bertrand Lankin estimates the city of Rome's total population fell from 800,000 in 408 to 500,000 by 419. This was the first time the city of Rome had been sacked in almost 800 years, and it had revealed the Western Roman Empire's increasing vulnerability and military weakness. It was shocking to people across both halves of the empire who viewed Rome as the eternal city and the symbolic heart of their empire. The Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II declared 3 days of mourning in Constantinople.